Welcome, it's the RC Renegade here, and today we're talking all about monster trucks. Did you know that actual monster trucks today are controlled by a radio transmitter? Now I know what you're thinking. In Monster Jam or other events, there are actual drivers behind the wheel controlling these trucks, and that's true. However, in the event of an emergency, track control uses a radio transmitter to shut off the truck. It's called a remote ignition interrupter, or RII for short, and an RII transmitter will shut off the spark to the engine, which will kill the engine in the event of an emergency. This comes in handy if, say, a truck rolled over and the driver was knocked unconscious. Track control could just flip a switch on the transmitter and it would kill the engine instantly, thanks to RII. So that's pretty cool. It's just an application of how monster trucks use radio control in today's world. Now today is a special day because we get an exclusive tour of the International Monster Truck Museum located in Butler, Indiana. Special thanks to Wildman Jeff for allowing us to do this. Now, in the video, we only show a portion of what they have at the museum, so if you're in the area, be sure to check them out and visit them in person. It's definitely a unique experience, and you can learn a lot about monster trucks during your visit. Hello, it's the RC Renegade here, and I am here with Wildman Jeff, and he's in the Midwest. He's been running monster trucks for many years, and he's very knowledgeable, and so he's going to give us an exclusive tour of his shop and his museum and just tell us about some of the trucks he has. Thank you, Jeff, for joining us today. You guys will like this episode.
That was pretty wild. His aunt and his dad, we went to school together. So I just met Samuel here, and it's pretty cool to have a fan that, from his parents. We went to school together, so that was pretty cool.
It's a small world.
Yep. So welcome to the International Monster Truck Museum Hall of Fame. We're in Butler, Indiana. I'm Jeff Cook. I'm known as the Wild Man back in my day of running monster trucks. But so we've got some pretty famous trucks here, like Equalizer. It was a national points champion back in, I believe, '91. We've got the Barefoot Racer, which was ran by a local wild man here from Auburn, Indiana. And that was a deal where he worked with Fred Schaefer. Fred Schaefer had him running one of the names. And Scott built that truck back in the day and raced with all the big names. Down there at the end, we've got Taurus, which was one of the first early lightweight four-link trucks, which is now what everybody's running is the four-link suspension. We're lucky to have King Kong. King Kong was one of the first three monster trucks to exist, and Jeff Dane restored this truck and actually donated it to the museum. So if you're in the local area, sometimes you'll see me taking it out and doing parades with it. And there's a couple diesel monster trucks that just came out. Everybody's like, oh, it's the only diesel monster truck. But in the early days, King Kong was the first diesel monster truck. So, and we've got Goliath, and then we've also got the heavy metal tank, which there was only about a 3-year period that the tanks were real popular. Probably in the mid 80s or late 80s where they were popular. But
is that the tracked vehicle over there?
Yeah,
Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so that was built off from a M4 military, like a Sherman tank. It was an M4 chassis, and they would turn the chassis around because the drive sprocket would normally be in the front, but they would turn it around so the engine and everything was in the back, so when they would hit the cars, it would do a big wheelie up onto the cars. And they were really neat to watch, but they were really abusive on the drivers. The drivers, when they would drive them, they got jostled around and beat up really bad. And then these things landed so hard that they would actually break concrete and the foundations in a lot of the coliseums and the arenas that they would run in. So they only ran them for a few years, and then all the promoters and the arenas and everything said, no more tanks, we don't want them. I remember in, I think, 86 or 87, they ran one in Fort Wayne, Indiana Coliseum, and I remember it hit so hard that it broke the ice cooling lines in the floor, because it served dual purpose. They played hockey in there too, and it actually flooded the basement. It was flooding the basement of the Coliseum, which they were having an RV, camper and RV show going on the same weekend. And they had an emergency because it was flooding, because they broke the foundation, all the lines, the cooling lines in the floor with the tank.
All because of these tracks here. These tracks were just too tough on the buildings.
Well, you got, what happens is all these steel wheels, this thing weighs a lot of poundage, and when it hits the ground, there's nothing to give, Now, monster trucks run these big tires that are called a flotation tire. So these here absorb the impacts a lot, and you'll actually get a bounce out of the truck. But these are a high flotation tire. They're bigger. They absorb the landings a lot more. Actually, in the early days, we used to laugh because this was our suspension, because everybody had such big springs, nothing would move. But in my early truck, I would actually run as low as 4 pounds of air pressure in my tires, just so that it would get more absorption when I would hit. So it's kind of funny.
That's incredible. Could you tell us about some of the suspension on these trucks? I mean, look at just the amount of detail that goes into these. What do you have to do to get one of these working?
So this truck was one of the early monster trucks, and it's got 5-ton military axles under it, which are out of a 5-ton military wrecker truck. And their front axles, they used 2 front axles, one in the front and the back, and that gives it front and rear steering. Now, the springs were out of a 5-ton military truck. A lot of the early days, guys would use springs out of semi trucks or dump trucks, because everybody thought bigger is better and heavier is good, because they were running over cars for fun. And it was a crowd entertainment thing, running over cars. And the heavier it was, the better, because you'd crush the cars flatter. But over time, they started racing, and then, weight was not their friend when they were racing. And the faster you went, the harder the landings and the jostling would be on the drivers. And then guys started having back and neck issues. So, through the years, people have developed better suspensions, better axles, better tires, wheels. Everything has progressed to be a lot better. And that's now, if you watch a lot of these monster truck shows on the internet and on TV and stuff, the trucks are just doing unbelievable stunts, and the drivers are able to walk away. And that's just from over time, things have gotten better, and they've developed better ways of doing things and safer. And the trucks can withstand a lot bigger impacts and stuff. But
So check this out, guys. We actually have a race car chassis here. You really don't see a lot of these around. This is in the museum. It's actually for sale. Here's the details here. The proceeds will benefit the museum. But you can see it has the engine here. Pretty bare bones. You can see down to the finer details. We have our Hoosier racing tires on there. We are in the Indiana, in the Hoosier state, in the Midwest. But look at this. The driver has his roll cage around that protects him. You have the racing harness. You got the handy window net that'll come up here, protect the driver in the event of an accident. But you'll notice just inside here, there's really not that much. It's kind of cool. You really don't see a lot of these around today. So the fact that they have one in the museum is pretty cool. Now, Jeff, I have a couple questions. Could you tell us what type of engines do these trucks use? And then the other question I have, how in the world do you climb up inside of them?
Okay, so originally most monster trucks had a gas combustion V8 engine. Most of them did. A few of them were diesels and stuff. But as racing progressed, guys would start using a supercharger or a blower on them, which forces more air into the cylinders, and they would run bigger carburetors and stuff with gas. Well, then some of these guys that had some drag racing history, which were like Fred Schaefer and Jack Wildman, who had Taurus, some of these guys actually understood about alcohol injection. So they started using alcohol injectors like the alcohol dragsters did. And so this engine here is a big block Chevy. This is probably, I'm guessing, probably a 468. It might be a 540 cubic inch big block Chevy with an 871 supercharger on it, and then a injector hat, and this one's an Enderley injector hat. So it runs on methanol alcohol, which methanol is made from wood pulp. It's not your corn alcohol, it's methanol alcohol, and it creates a lot more horsepower. So this engine here is putting out about 1,800 horsepower. And if you were running it on racing gas with 4 barrels, the same engine with 4-barrel carburetors with racing gas, you would probably be lucky to get 800 horsepower out of it. So alcohol, you burn twice as much of it, but it creates twice as much horsepower. So, you know, that changed everything. Now, when they went from the old early trucks like Hercules and King Kong and them, those you would go get in them by climbing up the tire, trying to open the door, and trying to be a monkey. You'd have to kind of be a monkey. And
so you'd have to work your way up from the bottom up to the tire and then into the truck. Okay.
As the trucks turned into more race trucks, they started making access where you would climb up through the floor, because it's just a fiberglass sheet.
So you climb up from the bottom.
Yep, they would climb
just
up
right
through
up inside
to get up into the driver's compartment, and that's how most of your trucks are to today. And everybody nowadays runs the fiberglass shell bodies, and these are a lot more easily replaced. So when they crash, it's a lot more affordable. It's easier to replace than the sheet metal bodies back in the old days. But
is this one here a fiberglass body, or is this sheet metal?
Actually, this was kind of the last of the steel race purpose built trucks. It still has a hollowed out steel body, and it still has a complete cab, has a roll cage in it, and you can see where they've gutted the dash and
oh wow, so you can't climb underneath this one. You actually have to climb climb up the old-fashioned way.
And you don't have any creature comforts. You only have what you need in there to race. You don't have extra carpet, none of that stuff. By the time this truck was popular, the show world was over. You know, it used to be guys would have big stereos and they'd have shag carpet and they would really make them show worthy. But when it started turning into more of a racing sport, you know, you started getting rid of stuff that just looked good.
I mean, you look on the back end of this thing, it's pretty hollow on the back end. There's really not a lot back here. That's really something. Well, thank you for the explanation, Jeff.
Yeah.
You're the man for the
we hope all your viewers would love to come out, and we'd love to visit with them. We're open Wednesday through Sundays, and we're in Butler, Indiana. It's a pretty neat place. There's a lot of neat history here, a lot of neat memorabilia in the display cases, and we have special events throughout the year too. We have a 9-acre field out back that we actually put on performance shows, and then during the winter we have other events here in the museum. So come out and visit us.
So Jeff was kind enough to let me get inside of one of these mighty monster trucks, and it's a lot different than I anticipated. You can see behind me here, it's just open on the back end. There's really not a lot inside. There's just an empty shell on the rear end of the truck. In front of me, let me flip the camera around here, show you guys. In front of me here, it's a lot different than your typical car or truck you would see on the road every day. You have your 2 basic pedals here, but then you have no airbag on the steering wheel. You have a roll cage to protect you in the event of a rollover, and you also have very basic gauges. You have your water temperature and pressure and your oil temperature and pressure. It's a lot different than the car that you drive every day. On the bottom you also have the basic shifter and just some switches and levers for fuel, turn off, and just some basic switches here. You can see we climbed up through the floor, so that's a very unique experience to get into this massive truck. You'll notice on the roll cage there's a padding right here so that in the event of a crash you don't hit your head and hurt yourself. To see out of this truck, it's a lot different than a truck that you drive every day. You're up so high, it's pretty difficult to see. Also, these trucks use power steering. They have hydraulic steering to help move these massive tires on this truck. So it's pretty cool. I've never been in one of these trucks before, but I can't imagine what it would be like to drive one of these. I mean, just the size and power of these trucks really is impressive. You can see behind us here, there's really not a lot. The driver's seat is here, and behind us is just an empty shell. You have your flags on the side, and there's no floor, so you can just see straight through to the ground.
Okay, so here is Hercules. Now Hercules was owned by a local guy here, and it started life out as a street-driven show truck. It originally had 38-inch tall tires on it. It had a real similar paint scheme. It was just a super cool truck, and I was a kid in the mid-'80s and would see him cruising through town with it, would always just go, wow, that truck is so cool. And it didn't have a name or anything back then. Well, then he just kept growing. Every year he would get a little bit bigger, put a little bit bigger tires on it. Well, then about 86-ish, I think, or 87 is when he got the bug to go full-out monster truck. And back then there was a lot of bumper height laws, and you know, guys with big street-driven trucks started running into troubles with the law. They would get pulled over and get tickets and sometimes towed because their bumper heights were too tall. So a lot of guys that had big street trucks actually turned them into monster trucks because, you know, who wants to lower a truck? Once you got a truck that's big, you don't want to go the other way, so you just go bigger. So this truck was built, and then he ran a lot of shows around the country and around our area in the mid-'80s. And we just found the chassis and stuff a few years ago. The truck had been parted out. He had sold it, had been parted out, and then we restored it and we brought it back to its original life. This would have been about 1988 is when it would have looked like this, but just a beautiful truck. This had a lot of show and a lot of bling to it back in the day. It has 48 shock absorbers on it, and that was the most that anybody ever had. But back in the show truck days, it was about who you could outdo with either more chrome or more shocks or more lights. He's got all kinds of off-road lights on it, and the paint was just beautiful on the truck, and everywhere it went, it was a crowd favorite.
It's a beautiful truck. How much does a set of tires like these ones here cost? How much does one tire cost on one of these trucks?
Back in the day of monster trucks, back in the 80s when they were buying them, they were about $1,700 or $1,800 a tire. Now you're looking at upwards of $6,000, $7,000 a tire if you buy the new ones today with the pricing today. But
so about $7,000 for something like this in today's market.
Now this tire behind us over here, Goodyear, these are the new 80-inch tires they're putting on a lot of farm and agriculture equipment. These are 80 inches tall, 50 inches wide, and this tire costs about what an average car costs nowadays. So if you need 4 of these, it's about like buying a small house.
That tire is so big I can't even get it all in the frame. That's a massive tire. Wow. You said that's an 80-inch tire?
Yep, 80 by 50, and it has a 46-inch rim in it, so you can crawl right inside of there.
Goodness gracious. And what's the going price on one of these nowadays?
About the price of an average car.
Goodness gracious. Well, I'm glad that my Impala...
Goodyear has supported the museum with these tires. We're actually going to put these on a truck that we're building that'll sit outside. It'll be an outside display truck so that when you're driving by on the highway, you'll see the truck and it'll attract people to come to the museum.
Wow, that's really nice, Jeff. Now, would you mind telling us about one of your first trucks over here, this orange truck, and just what it means to
So
you?
this is Shotgun Harry, and my dad worked at International Harvester when I was a kid, where they built these Scouts, and so we always had Scouts in our family. And in the mid '80s, I wanted to build a monster truck. I was in school, and of course I couldn't afford it, but I started building this truck in the mid '80s, and never got it finished before I got a job working for a monster truck team, and I went on tour and helped them, and then ended up driving their truck, and then through the years drove many a trucks. So about 12, 14, 15 years ago, I decided to get all the parts. All the parts had been shoved in my grandma's barn way back in the early 90s when the dream of building this kind of went away, when I was already working for another team. So about 15 years ago or so, I decided I'm going to build the truck I was building in high school. So we dug out all the parts and worked on it. I had a couple of good friends that come over, Eric and Greg, and my dad and them. Everybody jumped in and helped, and we built it just like what it would have been in the 80s. And this truck actually is kind of the catalyst that got the whole International Monster Truck Museum started, because nobody worried about the history of stuff until this truck was put together. And we took it around to a couple of shows and did some exhibition car crushes, which back in the day everybody just crawled over the cars. They didn't jump them like they do now. And so we did a little bit of that, and of course that got everybody excited, and decided, people were like, man, we love the old school stuff, we'd like to see more of it. And so one thing led to another, and that's kind of how all the museum started with a short story.
As always, thank you for watching. Like and subscribe, and be on the lookout for more videos.